But sometimes what makes healing so complicated is that the obvious loss isn't the only thing that broke. Sometimes something else broke along with it. Your trust, your confidence, your identity, your sense of safety, your sense of belonging, your faith, your understanding of your own history, your ability to imagine the future, maybe even trust with yourself. Welcome to the Bounce Back Black Woman podcast. I'm Dell, coach, author, mom, and your sister along this journey of healing, growth, resilience, and living more intentionally. As Black women, we know all too well that life can break our hearts in more ways than one. But here in this space, we heal, grow, rebuild, and bounce back together. Because it's not just you. It's not just me. It's us. Hey there, my friend, and welcome back to Bounce Back Black Woman. You know that we often use the phrase broken heart to describe a lot of different experiences. Someone you love dies, or your marriage ends, or your spouse cheats, or a friendship that you thought would last forever falls apart unexpectedly. Someone you love walks out of your life. A family relationship becomes estranged. You're fired or laid off from the job where you've invested years of your life and your career. Or you're rejected by someone or something that you were certain was part of your future. Different experiences, different circumstances, different consequences, and certainly different levels of pain. I'm not interested in ranking any of them, today or ever, because each of them holds their own weight at the time that they descend upon you in life. And because pain doesn't need to win a competition before we're allowed to acknowledge that it hurts. Pain is pain. And your pain doesn't have to be the worst pain in the room in order to deserve your attention. But here's what I've been thinking about lately. When something painful happens, we usually know the obvious thing that we've lost. The person, or the marriage, the friendship, the job, the relationship, the future that we thought we were going to have. But sometimes what makes healing so complicated is that the obvious loss isn't the only thing that broke. Sometimes something else broke along with it. Your trust, your confidence, your identity, your sense of safety, your sense of belonging, your faith, your understanding of your own history, your ability to imagine the future, maybe even trust with yourself. And sometimes we spend so much time trying to get over the thing that happened that we never stop long enough to ask, what exactly did this break inside of me? Because maybe healing begins there, not by pretending that the loss didn't matter or didn't hurt us, and not by replacing what it was that we lost. And certainly not by rushing yourself towards some imaginary finish line where you're supposed to just be over it. But by understanding what actually needs to be rebuilt. Sometimes what breaks is your sense of safety. And I'm not just talking about your physical safety. I'm talking about that internal sense of safety that says, I know what I can count on. I know who I can count on. You thought the marriage was secure, or you thought the friendship was solid. You thought your family would always back you in a certain way. You thought your job was stable and you planned your future around it. You assumed that this person would still be around next year. You thought you knew what tomorrow was going to look like in your life. And then something happens that reminds you, with absolutely no regard for whether you were prepared to learn the lesson or not, that life can change on a dime. Sometimes overnight, sometimes with a single phone call, sometimes with a conversation you were not ready to have, sometimes with just an email, sometimes with a confession. And then suddenly the world that felt so predictable doesn't. That is a different kind of wound, my friend. Because now you aren't only grieving what happened, you may also be afraid of what else could happen next. If this marriage could end, what else isn't secure? If this person could die without warning, who else could I lose? If my employer could eliminate my position after everything I've given, what does my loyalty even mean? If my best friend could betray me, who can I really trust? If the person sleeping next to me could keep this secret, what else don't I know? You see, the event, the thing, happens once. But sometimes our nervous system keeps waiting for it to happen again and again and again. So rebuilding after that might just require more than accepting the loss. Rebuilding requires rebuilding a sense of safety in a world that you now understand differently. Sometimes what breaks is our trust. Now, this one is obvious when we're talking about betrayal. Somebody lied, somebody cheated, someone broke a confidence, made a promise and didn't keep it. But trust can become complicated after other kinds of pain also. Sometimes the question becomes, who can I trust now? And sometimes the question even turns into, can I even trust myself? And that's the one we don't talk about enough. Because after betrayal, people often ask themselves, how could I not know? I know there had to be signs. Why didn't I see them? Why did I believe that person? Sometimes over and over again. Why did I stay? What was wrong with me? Why didn't I ask more questions? And suddenly the person that you're questioning isn't the only person who hurt you, because now you're questioning you, your judgment, your instincts, your ability to read people, your decision making, maybe even your own intelligence. And my friend, I want to tell you firsthand that that can be incredibly damaging. And that's because now every future decision gets filtered through your mind with the question, but what if I'm wrong again? You see, healing may eventually require learning that trusting somebody who proved untrustworthy doesn't mean that you were foolish for having the capacity to trust in the first place. And missing something doesn't mean you can never trust your judgment again. Sometimes you made the best decision that you could with the information you had at the time. Sometimes what breaks is your identity. Who were you before this happened? And who are you now? And friends, sometimes that is not an easy question. If you've spent 30 years being somebody's spouse and suddenly you're widowed or divorced, who are you without that relationship? You may have even forgotten yourself. If being a mother or father shaped you in nearly every part of your life, and then you suddenly lose a child, that grief touches places that language can barely reach. And while I've been fortunate to never experience that firsthand, I have several close friends and family members who have. And I can tell you that that is a loss and heartbreak unlike many others. If you've spent 20 years building a career and suddenly the organization that you gave your blood, sweat, tears, and time to says that your services are no longer needed, what happens when that title disappears? It can feel like your entire professional identity was just stripped from you. If your social world revolved around a friendship or a relationship that is now gone, over, maybe you don't ever even speak anymore, where do you belong? You see, we build identities around our relationships, around our careers, our families, our roles, our responsibilities. That is human. But when one of those things disappears, sometimes we're left staring at ourselves in the mirror, thinking, who am I now? And rebuilding doesn't necessarily mean becoming who you were before, because almost always you can't. And sometimes you don't even want to. Sometimes healing requires meeting the version of yourself who exists after the thing happened. Not a lesser version, not a damaged version, a different version. One who has lived through something that the earlier version of you hadn't. Sometimes what breaks is your understanding of the past. Now, this one can be particularly painful after betrayal. And I say this from firsthand knowledge. You discover something today, and suddenly you are mentally traveling backward through years and years of memories. Was that trip even real? Was that conversation honest? Was he already seeing someone else then? Did my friend really mean what she said? Was my employer already planning to let me go when they told me everything was fine? You see, new information can change how old memories feel. And that's disorienting because now you're not only grieving the present, you are questioning the past, everything you thought to be true. But here's something that I think is important to remember. New information can change what you understand about an experience without erasing everything that you experienced within it. I'm going to say that one again. New information can change what you understand now about an experience without erasing everything that you experienced at the time within it. If you genuinely laughed that day, your laughter was real, even if the person turned out to be a complete stranger to you. If you loved sincerely and wholeheartedly, your love was real. If you showed up faithfully, your faithfulness was real. Someone else's dishonesty doesn't retroactively make your authenticity false. You don't have to throw away your entire history because you learned something painful about another person's part in it. Now, sometimes what breaks is your future. And I think this may be one of the most underestimated parts of loss. We don't only grieve what was. Sometimes we grieve what was supposed to be or what we thought would be. The anniversaries that won't happen. The retirement that you had planned together. The trips that you were going to take. The career path you thought you were building. The holidays you assumed would always look the same. The friend that you thought would be sitting beside you when you were 80. The phone calls you assumed you'd always be able to make. You see, you aren't grieving memories. You are grieving expectations that you had. You're grieving experiences that existed only in your imagination, but felt completely real in your heart because you had every reason to believe they were coming. And that's still loss. One of the hardest parts of rebuilding can be allowing yourself to imagine a future again when the last future that you imagined disappeared. Not necessarily a better future. I want to always be careful with that language. Some losses are not secretly for the best. Some things are simply heartbreaking, plain and simple. But even after heartbreaking things happen, there can still be a future. Because different doesn't automatically mean empty. Sometimes what breaks is belonging. You see, pain can rearrange your social world. Divorce can change your friendship circle. You've heard the term fighting over who gets the friends in the divorce. That is real. A friendship breakup can change an entire friend group. Job loss can abruptly disconnect you from people that you used to speak to every single day and go to lunch and all of the after work things. Death can change family dynamics on the turn of a dime. Estrangement can affect holidays, gatherings, traditions, and relationships with people who weren't directly involved in the original conflict at all. And suddenly you're asking, where do I fit now? And sometimes those are the reasons why we stay attached to things long after they've become unhealthy. Because we're not only afraid of losing the relationship, we're afraid of losing the world surrounding the relationship. The friends, the traditions, the routines, the community, the identity, the familiarity. Sometimes rebuilding means intentionally creating belonging again, instead of waiting for it to just magically reappear. And yes, that can and often will feel incredibly uncomfortable, especially when you've spent years believing that you already knew where you belonged. And sometimes what breaks is your own faith. We have to talk about this one too, friend, because painful things can bring up questions that we don't always feel comfortable saying out loud. God, where were you? How could you have allowed this? Why didn't you stop it? Why didn't you just heal them? Why didn't you save my marriage? Why didn't you protect me from the horrible things that happened? Why did I pray for one thing and get something completely different? Sometimes pain doesn't make faith grow stronger immediately. In fact, it makes faith more complicated in the early stages for sure. And I don't think that pretending otherwise helps anybody. There are times when faith looks like confidence, and there are times when faith looks like showing up before God confused, angry, heartbroken, and saying, God, I don't understand this. That is still a relationship with God. So you don't have to clean up your grief before bringing it to Him. Now, here's a question that I actually want you to sit with. So what actually broke? Not why am I not over this yet? Not why does this still bother me? Not other people have been through worse, so why am I still struggling? But instead, what did this experience actually wound in me? Was it your trust, safety, identity, belonging, confidence, faith, your ability to imagine a future for yourself, or to trust in your own judgment? Maybe it was more than one or many of them. Because once you can name what it is that hurts, then you can begin asking for what that part of you needs to heal. Maybe trust needs to be rebuilt slowly. Maybe identity needs exploration. Maybe belonging requires a new community. Maybe confidence requires making decisions again, even small ones, and seeing yourself survive them. Maybe faith requires honesty with God instead of pretending. Maybe imagining a future starts with something as small as allowing yourself to look forward to next month. Healing doesn't mean pretending that the loss didn't happen, so don't ever think that. And bouncing back doesn't mean returning to exactly who you were before it happened. We've talked about that before. Sometimes resilience means integrating what happened into your story without allowing it to become the entire story. You don't have to erase it. You don't have to minimize it. You don't have to be grateful that it happened. And you don't have to call every painful experience a blessing. But you can begin deciding what happens inside of me from here. My friend, your pain doesn't need permission. And before we close, I want to return to where it was that we started. Please stop disqualifying your own pain because somebody somewhere has experienced something worse. There will always be worse, but that doesn't make your hurt imaginary. The fact that someone lost a spouse doesn't mean that your divorce can't devastate you. The fact that someone lost a child doesn't mean the death of your best friend doesn't matter. The fact that somebody has been unemployed for 2 years doesn't mean being unexpectedly laid off yesterday doesn't still hurt. The fact that another person's betrayal was worse than yours doesn't mean that yours didn't still wound you. Your pain doesn't have to be the worst pain in the room to deserve your attention. You can hold compassion for someone else's suffering without abandoning compassion for your own. Pain is pain. And whatever level yours is at, you deserve the opportunity to understand it. Because understanding what broke is one of the very first steps toward understanding what needs to heal. Psalm 34:18 says, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." Y'all know that that's one of my favorite verses because it doesn't say that God is only close to the person with the most devastating story. It says that he is close to all of the brokenhearted. There's no ranking system attached, no requirement that your pain meet some minimum threshold before God begins to care about it. And then there's one last thing I want us to notice. God being close to the brokenhearted doesn't mean the heart was never broken. Faith doesn't always prevent pain. Sometimes faith is what reminds us that we aren't alone inside of our pain. So if something has broken your heart, bring the real version of that pain to God. Not the cleaned up version, not the "I know everything happens for a reason" version, if that's not actually where you are in that moment. Don't try to fake that. Bring the real one, the angry one, the confused one, the devastated one, the disappointed one, because what I know is that God will meet you there too. This week's challenge is going to require a little honesty. I want you to think about something that hurt you deeply. Maybe it's recent, maybe it happened years and years ago. And instead of focusing only on what happened, I want you to ask yourself, what did this break or wound in me? Trust, safety, confidence, identity, belonging, faith, hope, your ability to imagine a future for yourself, your trust in yourself? I want you to write it down and then ask one more question. What would rebuilding this actually look like? Not fixing everything, not simply getting over it, not pretending that you're okay. Just one piece. What is one small thing that you could do to begin tending to the part of you that was actually wounded? Because sometimes we keep trying to heal the great big thing, but the great big thing already happened. What we can tend to now is what happened inside of us because of it. Now, conversations like this are one of the reasons that I'm excited about what we're doing next month. On September 21st, Earth, Wind, and Fire Day, I'm hosting our first Bounce Back Black Woman Kitchen Table Conversation live. This isn't going to be me talking at you for an hour, so don't worry about that. I want us to actually gather around the virtual kitchen table so that we can connect and reflect, raise our hands, share what we're comfortable sharing, and have some of the most honest conversations that we don't always have enough spaces to have. I'll be sharing details soon about how to register, so make sure that you're following at BounceBackBlackWoman on Instagram and TikTok, and stay connected at bouncebackblackwoman.com. I'd really love to have you at the table. So until next time, my friend, remember that what happened to you matters. What it changed in you matters. And what you choose to rebuild from here matters too. Well, that's it for today, my friend. I really hope this episode inspired, encouraged, or just plain comforted you. If so, please share it with a friend who might be struggling in her own healing journey. And if you take a moment to leave a quick review on Apple Podcasts, you'll help other women find encouragement through their heartbreak. Remember that God is holding your hand along this journey, and guess what? I'm holding the other. Life is short, so bounce back, Black woman.